Ne te casaveras extra. Seek nothing outside yourself. These are the opening lines to Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance. And in this essay that we're going to be discussing today, it really lies in the fact that greatness lies in self-trust, independence, and connection to the divine. Now, this fundamental essay on individualism, trusting intuition, the value of originality, self-reliance as a moral responsibility, critique of consistency, and connection to divine are the essential themes that we're going to be discussing today. And so to begin, let's discuss his conception of originality versus conventionality. Now, what does it mean to be original versus conventional? Well, to be original means to speak truly from within yourself, to speak with conviction of your inner knowledge or wisdom, to know that what you say is true for you, and not because someone else has told you to say so or because it is the beliefs of another. For we actually ascribe the highest merit to those who speak for themselves and who do not speak other people's opinions or facts. And this original conviction is always detectable through us. He says the soul can always distinguish between the two. And somehow there is that essence when someone speaks from the soul, so to speak, with originality, with truth, with conviction that resonates so deeply within us. It is also something that can only be spoken of by the person themselves, and that is not an imitation of someone else. And yet we are so easily dissuaded by our own truth that we feel like we must present the truth of another. And so Emerson says, a man should always learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within. We mustn't dismiss our thoughts simply because they are our own. We must treat them with the greatness and power that we do other people's. For in every genius we see the originality, the defiance of convention, the ability to state the truth as they see it, which then becomes a reality for everyone to hear. And so when we do this, when we speak with conviction, we start to realize what we are capable of thinking and achieving. And we won't know this until we've tried. And unfortunately, it is like the divine, it is like we are ashamed of these divine ideas which are in ourselves and wait until another person speaks them in order for us to say, yes, I agree, I think that too. But we don't need to wait. We must speak truly and properly from within ourselves. We must trust ourselves and accept the place that divine providence has found for us. There's a quote here from him that says, in every work of genius we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. When we see someone else speaking the truths that we already know, there is something about it that confirms the truth within us, but simultaneously feels foreign because it is not coming from within our own being. Now, the true source of power lies within us. It does not lie external to us. Ne te casaveras extra. Seek nothing outside yourself. Originality is conforming to no one, just like divinity conforms to no one. And so we must speak with independence and genuineness. We must act accordingly. And in doing so, we assert ourselves as unique and divine beings. There's another quote here. Nothing is at last sacred, but the integrity of your own mind. I'll say it again. Nothing is at last sacred, but the integrity of your own mind. When we go against our principles or our virtues or our values, we lose the sacredness of our being in that moment. For we reject our originality, our essence, our uniqueness, and instead we conform to that of another person or group or people. And the truth is always more powerful than any affection thereof, where we are able to harness the enormous gravity of a true statement that is spoken from within, that resonates and resounds deeply within the hearts and minds of other people. And so we must take this journey alone, right? Not physically alone necessarily, but spiritually alone, connected to the divine source, which we'll get to in a moment. But in doing so, what we're able to do is say, I'm going to do what concerns me and not concerns anyone else. We assert ourselves as independent, virtuous, original, non-conforming beings. And to do so opens the world to us, for we are able to take our rightful place in the world, just as we are meant to be who we are. And in doing so, there is this freedom to associate ourselves with whomever we like, to take company of the people that we wish, to do the things that light our soul and not those that do not. We get to make these choices in our lives, and it's, in a sense, it is our obligation to do so, because what else is there to do? Why bother doing what other people want us to do if it goes against our principles and morals? Instead, we must stand steadfast against anything which goes against us. For what could be more in line with nature and with divinity than to be as you are? Right? The universe manifests infinitely, and each person, let's say, is a whole unique being that is supposed to be just the way that it is. And so to be other than you are is almost to defy nature. But instead, to live in accordance with nature is how we find peace and harmony in our lives. We are able to transcend the limitations of the group and instead stand strong and virtuous alone. Now, this doesn't mean we need to reside in solitude to do this, for there is a quote that I will read to you now, which says, "Insist on yourself, never imitate. Your own gift you can present every moment with the cumulative force of a whole life's cultivation. But of the adopted talent of another you have only extemporaneous half possession." And so we must be ourselves. We must not be other people. That which each of us can do, none but our Maker can teach us. And we don't know what this is until we do it. And so we must take time and be cautious to figure out what is our purpose in life. What are our principles? What are our values? What is our destiny and our fate? And how can we bring this forth in the most earnest and brave way possible? For it is a brave journey to go with your fate, but it is where the greatest strength comes from. For to follow in the footsteps laid before you is to follow a path that is already known. But to blaze the way yourself is the true mark of freedom, of courage, and of independence. And, we can see this in history and even in our modern times, where all of the greatest people that have ever lived are unique. They are not defined by others around them, but instead stand above and beyond anyone else. They dare to think beyond the contemporary thought. They dare to assert themselves in a way that others will reject, but they do not care, for they know it is their truth. And you cannot hope to do anything greater than this, right? And then, to do so really is to embrace ourselves fully, to begin to trust ourselves. And yet there is a consequence to this. For nonconformity, the world whips you with displeasure. And so you must be strong and faithful to withstand its blows. But the sour face of the multitude, like their sweet faces, have no deep cause, but are put on and off as the wind blows and the newspaper directs. It is of no real consequence for others to judge you or to disagree or misunderstand who you are, for theirs is not true, for they have mostly been the opinions of others that are directed by the waves of the flow of society in that moment. People or institutions or governments or whatever it might be telling you what to think, what to feel, and how to act. And so, of course, if you stand against that in any way possible, you will be shunned, right? But it's not a big shunning, because it's not from a place of deep truth, because it is just the conformity of the group. And so to go against that is brave and courageous, and comes with consequences of displeasure from other people, but so be it. For the alternative is to displease yourself and to go against what your instinct and your intuition is telling you is true. And the other problem that we have is that everyone also thinks they know what you should do better than you, that your duty is known better to others than it is to yourself. And that is so far from the truth, for only we can know what our duty truly is, where our values lie, and what our principles are. And so we must search for that inside ourselves, in silence and with conviction, to know that what it is to be me is this and that and that, and that that's good, and that that's okay, and that that is a tremendous source of power within ourselves. And it is a guiding light for how we should continue to act and be in the world, to remain truthful to ourselves, to not go against anything that would displease ourselves, to stick with our true intentions and guidance from within. The problem is also that when we conform to that which we object to, it scatters our force, right? You lose time, you lose character, you lose your sense of power, because you are doing what you know you shouldn't be doing. And so instead, you must do what you know you should be doing and what you must be doing. And do it well, and do it proudly, and do it courageously, but do it humbly at the same time. For there is no one who is better than another. We are all equal in this place, and no person has more power than another except that which is voluntarily given. Right? So the true power is spiritual power that is within you. The power to think, the power to be, and the power to know. Right? All of that is true power beyond any physical or material power that may present itself. And so, the next part that I'd like to get to is this idea that Emerson introduces of self-trust, right? And one of the big barriers to self-trust is our fear of consistency. That we have this reverence for a past narrative about ourselves that we feel we must live up to, or face the judgment of other people who only know us by our past actions and words. And so it's almost like we live in accordance with the images that people have created for us about ourselves, instead of just living for who we truly are in that moment. Right? And it's almost as if there's also this fear of, well, what if I go against something I've said yesterday? And it's like, so what? Right? Speak the truth of today, and tomorrow speak tomorrow's truth. And that's fine. embrace growth, embrace change, embrace evolution, and really just harness the power of the present moment to be where you are right now and know what is real and true right now. For all power lies in the present moment, right? Not in the past and not in the future. And, this idea that with honesty, we must embrace our true self in the present moment brings with it a magnetism, right? If you are able to trust yourself and act individually and be original, so to speak, we start to exude or attract a magnetism to us, right? Where people are attracted to it. They like it because it is authentic, it is real, right? And yet fear gets in our way of doing that. Fear of disappointment, fear of what if they don't like what I have to say, and fear of judgment at the end of the day. And yet when we are true and when we speak properly that which we believe to be true, that is what really attracts people to us. And if they don't agree with us, that's fine, for they must speak theirs, right? It's not that everyone must have the same true opinion about anything, right? And this is on a metaphysical level that we're talking about. We're not talking about, scientific truths. That's a different conversation to be had, where there's, objective truths based on evidence and things like that. And that's fine. And I accept that. And I agree with the scientific method and approach wholeheartedly. But this is a personal conversation, a spiritual conversation, right? And before we get to this idea of intuition, which is inner wisdom, right, I want to just speak about this idea of character for a moment, right? Because just like what we were saying is you must be who you are. People will know and see who you are, actually regardless of what actions you take. For there is something at a level that is much deeper than appearances that is at work and can communicate the authenticity of what you're saying or the non-authenticity of what you're saying. It is almost like the soul cannot be deceived, right? True intentions and true wisdom is always obvious to those who are looking. Right, he says, for one will the actions will be harmonious, however unlike they seem. One tendency unites all action, right? People know who you are in your presence. And so you might as well be aligned with that because they already know, right? If they are willing to listen carefully and sense you at the deepest level of your being, right? Which not everyone does, but everyone can do, certainly. It's not a tremendously difficult thing to do. You just need to pay attention and listen to what your voice and your intuition is telling you about other people, and you will know who they truly are, right? For intuition is the greatest guide that we have in this life. And even if sometimes it leads us in directions that we're not anticipating or that were different to what we thought they would be, that's okay, because what better guidance system do you have than that inner voice that's telling you right from wrong? And so, on this idea of how genuine action explains itself, accordingly, conformity explains nothing, right? If you conform with a group, right, that explains nothing of you and what you think and who you are, because you're just a member of a group, right? As he says, wearing the prison uniform that the group has assigned to us, right? Think for yourself. Don't just listen to other people's ideas. Internalize them make sense to you, and understand what the wisdom underneath what they're saying is saying, and then you will know what it means or doesn't mean. And then there is this idea of honor, right? To be a character of honor. And Emerson says that honor is venerable to us because it is no ephemera. It is always ancient virtue, right? Now, what does that mean? Is that honor is a virtue that we ascribe typically to people in the past. And when you read history of great leaders and thinkers and actors in the world, where we say they're honorable. And what does it mean to be honorable? It means to be virtuous, to live according to principle, right? To do right even when it's difficult. And this transcends actually the age of the person or any conditions thereabouts, whether they're wealthy or poor or a leader or a follower or a soldier or a general or a thinker or a poet or an artist. It is in our true actions, in our true alignment with our virtues and our principles that honor is found, right? And so we seek honor and we revere it because it is the descriptor of honest. It is the descriptor of living in accordance with your values, is to live honorably. Right? And so now onto this idea of intuition, right? He says, the magnetism of original action is explained when we inquire the reason of self-trust. But who is the trustee? The source, at once the essence of genius, of virtue, and of life, which we call spontaneity or instinct, right? And that's what I was saying a bit earlier. I was referencing this idea that when you trust yourself, you listen to your internal voice, right, in the present moment, and it is spontaneous. You cannot predict what it'll be except to listen to what it is. And it is intuition because it is not a tuition, which is a teaching. It is like an internal teaching, and everything afterwards is just like tuitions. It's like external teachings. And so if you listen to that guidance within you, right, you become magnetic. And if you really act in accordance with it, your actions become magnetic too. And that's why, we must develop this idea, this self-trust, because if we can trust that part of ourselves that offers us this primary wisdom, we begin to feel at peace with ourselves and the world. For we know that we have a guiding light, a living guiding light in the present moment, right? Nothing that we have to ever remember or think about, but just that we have to be aware of and listen to. And, what he says here is, in that deep force behind which analysis cannot go, all things find their common again. So here what he's referencing or talking about is this idea of, if you remain silent for a long time, you begin to connect with the beingness of life, right? This ultimate oneness of all things, where individuality and separation cease to exist, and there is this total unity and harmony with all that is, right? And there is this knowing, right? Not a conceptual knowing, but a deep understanding and appreciation and love for this shared essence with everything in life, right? And it is this immense intelligent force, right, that we receive through our intuition that guides us in how to live our life. And so, like he says, we lie in the lap of immense intelligence, which makes us receivers of its truth and organs of its activity, right? It is almost, it is transcendental, right? It is beyond the conceptions of materialism and what we know of the ordinary life and existence. It is something that is deeply spiritual and that is, easily accessible to anyone if you just look within inside yourself for a moment, right? Because it is ever living right here, right now. We could use the words that were often used to describe God, like omnipresent, meaning everywhere, and omnipotent, meaning all-powerful, and omniscient, meaning all-knowing. And these attributes have been ascribed to this being that traditionally Emerson would, help explain, is that was thought to be outside of all of us and acting upon us. When instead what we were coming to understand, and what some teachers and sages have understood since the beginning of time, is that it is actually within us. It is who we are at our essence, that we are the living embodiments of divinity. Everyone equally and simultaneously, that there is no one who is more so or less so than the other. But just like the universe, if you think about it in this way, every atom in the universe exists within a whole, right? And there is constant flux and constant change, and atoms are constantly, bonding to each other and separating from each other to form different molecules, and molecules to form, different compounds, and compounds to form different materials. And yet we can separate them and break them into their material components and whatever, but they all exist within this sea of atoms. Now we can divide atoms even smaller, but we're just talking on principle, and we could talk about subatomic particles and all that, and that's fine. The idea still stands that subatomic particles gather together to form atomic particles, which form together to form atoms, right? It's the same. And so whatever the primary physical substance of the universe is, there is a huge amount, which we cannot even conceive how many, and then there is just constant change, and it's all the same at the bottom level. And maybe at that bottom level, it's just energy, right? Where there is just energy in motion, right? And this is actually a lot of what, Einstein's E equals mc squared famous equation alludes to, is that energy is matter and matter is energy, right? They're different states of the same thing. And so if the whole universe is just a giant pool of energy just materializing in different forms, then of course everything is one and whole. And of course we are part of that, right? And then the metaphysical question is, well, what is an energy the manifestation of? And that's where we get to this idea of a universal mind, right? Manifesting as energy and thought. Manifesting as energy and material worlds. And, that's an idea for a different conversation. But this energy is non-static, right? It is dynamic, and it is constantly in motion, which is why everything is always moving in life and everything is always changing. And so we must flow with life in the present moment, for we must accept the reality that is here now, for it is the only true reality that is this moment's reality. And when we do so, we remain in connection with nature as it is. Most things other than humans live wholly in the present moment, right? They don't think about the past or worry about the future. They just live now because that's all that there is. Emerson says here, he says, the roses under my window make no reference to former or better ones. They are for what they are. They exist with God today. And they are perfect in this moment of existence, in every moment of existence, for they simply are one with the totality of all things. Right? It is really only us who lives in our heads in the past or in the future and suffers for it, right? Because we either want the present to be different in some crucial way and think it should be, and so we resist the reality of what is, or we think the present is insufficient in some way, and so we yearn for a different future, or we worry about the future that we think is going to happen and might, but probably won't happen the way that we think it's going to anyway, right? Because there's, essentially infinite variable factors that we can't consider when projecting the future. And so there's this other really important statement that he makes, which is that whenever a mind is simple and receives divine wisdom, old things pass away. Means, teachers, texts, temples fall. It lives now. It absorbs past and future into the present hour. All things are made sacred by relation to it. And so when we are quiet internally, right, we allow our intuition, our inner wisdom to come forth and speak in the present moment, right? What happens is everything else falls away. That the truth is a living experience, right? It is not written somewhere else or spoken by someone else in the past. Those are, ways of describing the truth, but the real truth is in the present moment. It is here, it is now, and it is within, right? And it is accessible to you at every moment if you quieten your mind and listen, right? And discover that this divinity lives within you here and now, right? And he says, the centuries are conspirators against the sanity and authority of the soul, right? We look to past people and teachers and, wisdom of the ages to say, tell us what the truth is, instead of listening to ourselves to discover what the truth is now, right? And that's such a profound transformational shift that we can undergo by really just tapping in, quietening the thoughts, and allowing it to unfold in a way that we don't know what it will be, but we must trust that it'll be right and that it'll be good. So we move on to this idea of the good, right? And he says, when good is near you, when you have life in yourself, it is not known or accustomed by any way. You shall not discern the footprints of any other. The way, the thought, the good shall be wholly strange and new, right? So when you are in touch with this goodness in you, it might seem odd and strange and new, for it is, because we have been living the truth of others, not our own truth. And by embracing it wholly and fully, right, he says, fear and hope are alike beneath it, where there is no concern if we fully embrace the truth now, for we know it is real and it is here and it is now. They are self-existent, right? Truth and rightness are self-existent. They do not need anything but themselves to exist. And that's a really important and profound statement. Quick drink of water. Hydration nation. And so self-existence is the attribute of the supreme cause, and it constitutes the measure of good by the degree in which it enters into all lower forms. And so to exist on your own, right, something that exists on their own, is an attribute of the supreme cause, which is this divinity that we are speaking of, this oneness, this superconsciousness, right? And to be an attribute of something is like to be a character of it, right? Like the attributes of this divinity is omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, and self-existence, meaning its existence doesn't depend on anything else, right? It does not need anything other than itself to exist. And only really the supreme cause or this divinity exists as such, and then it expresses itself in a multitude of forms, and the degree with which that being can exist on its own is the degree of goodness we attribute to it. And so really, the more you rely on yourself and the more you exist on your own, the more good you will feel and the more good you will be. And this is not a good and bad. It's just this higher order goodness of rightness, right, of truth. And so, this is a journey that we actually, like I was saying earlier, we must take this journey alone, right? It doesn't mean we need to isolate ourselves, but we must always take time for ourselves to sit in the quietness, right? To connect with our deeper self, with our soul, to listen, to be still, to embrace that being, to feel connected to the whole universe. And in doing so, we ease so much of our fears and anxieties about the world, because we begin to know at a core level that we are part of the universe, that we are not separate from it. We often think of ourselves as separate little entities that have to really just fight to survive against the harsh, cruel world. And when we switch that mindset up to say, I am connected and I am part of the whole world, right? The good and the bad, because there is good and bad in the world. I'm not saying that there isn't. But when we feel connected with all of that, that is when we feel a sense of harmony and of calmness and of oneness, right? That feeling of just total relaxation, of trust. Another word for this is faith, right? And so when we have faith, we are connected to the whole universe, and everything feels okay. And that only happens in this moment. It is not something that we acquire. It is not something that we can do. It is simply an allowing of the being to come forth from within you, to recognize the connectedness that is already here, that is ever present, always, right? And it's such a different way of living in the world. And so, at the end of the day, he says, nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of your principles. So in spite of everything, right, when we live originally as who we truly are, and we do not conform to others, and, we trust our intuition, and we value originality, and we recognize self-reliance as a moral responsibility of our own to the good, that is when we find this connection to the divine. That is when we are able to stand strong in the face of great difficulty in life. It enables us to be free, to be whole, and to be here totally and completely. And so to do this is to be an essentially strong person, right? There is this profound sense of greatness within you. Allow it to come forth. Allow it to be free. And allow yourself to manifest the greatness that is within you. For who knows where it will lead you or what it will look like. And only you can know that by doing it. You cannot think it. You can only do it. I mean, you have to think it first, and then you do it. But fundamentally, right, it will manifest as you go, and not all at once. And so trust the journey you are on in life, and find where it leads you. And be content with the fact that if you live by your principles and by your values, that you will live a life of peace. Not a life of ease necessarily, because life is challenging, but a life of peace and contentment with the world. And that is something that we are all searching for. And that is why this is one of the greatest essays that I've ever read. Thank you for listening.